Good evening, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you'll are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about at least this little topic that I found somewhat very interesting. And the reason why I thought that I would talk about this topic overall is because, I thought that this would be a certain way to address not only a certain amount of narratives, but also address a certain career of certain fighters around this weight class. And yet again, this is going to be another video that not only addresses Mr. Jermall Charlo, but also Mr. Canelo Alvarez. And of course, this is going to address the topic overall about recently what Mike Tyson, who of course was a former very decently great all-time great boxer throughout his day, if you want to call him all-time great, because of course Mike Tyson, he probably does get remembered as a little bit greater than what he actually was. But when it comes down to it, all in all, make no mistake about it, he was a decently great fighter. But Mike Tyson, of course, he has, I believe, a podcast on YouTube overall where he invites certain fighters on his show especially. And one of those fighters, of course, as of recent, were Mr. Jermall Charlo. And if you want to check out the video for yourself, go ahead. I watched, I believe, about the first 20 minutes of it. Thought that it was a very decent interview. Thought that it was a very decent podcast where they talk about something. But Mike Tyson, basically what he asked Jermall Charlo is, who do you want to face next? Who do you want to, overall face off with next? You should be facing some of the big dogs out there. How come overall you haven't gotten a fight with some of the bigger guys out there? Now, of course, I can't blame every single big fight overall that hasn't happened on Jermall Charlo. I can't necessarily claim that every single big fight that hasn't happened has been his fault. But what I will say about Jermall Charlo is this. It's very clear to me, especially in this video, if you've seen this podcast video, or all in all, if you haven't, I overall would prescribe that you watch it, or I would basically recommend that you watch it because I thought that it was a very decent video. And I think that it pretty much tells you pretty much what Jermall Charlo was mainly focused on. And what Jermall Charlo was really focused on is that he wants that big fight with Canelo Alvarez, but I don't think that Canelo Alvarez is really 100% focused on him right now. That's not me saying that Canelo would not want the fight later on. I think, of course, there's a lot of channels out there that they're going to try to spoon feed you the narrative and the impression that Canelo Alvarez, that he's pretty much fighting the weakest links. For those of us overall that know anything about boxing, we know that that is not the case. And that Canelo Alvarez overall has fought a lot of great competition within the past several years. Does that necessarily mean that I agree with every move that Canelo Alvarez may do? No, that doesn't mean that. This is not a fanboy channel. This is not me basically always trying to stick up for Canelo Alvarez and put his name in a better light, but that's not what I do with any fighter. Bottom line is, I try to be as logical and objective as possible. And even Jermall Charlo and Mike Tyson, when it comes down to it, even in the interview, if overall you wanted to take a look at it, they even claim, which is the same thing that I've been claiming for a very decently long time, that right now Canelo Alvarez is the current number one pound-for-pound fighter. Mike Tyson and Paul Pierce, who I believe is also on the podcast, he basically asked Jermall Charlo, he said, well, who do you think is the current number one pound-for-pound fighter? And Jermall Charlo, for allegedly having so much animosity towards Canelo Alvarez, as what a lot of these channels always try to allege, and with them always trying to allege this bullshit narrative of, oh, now that black fighters are comfortable, they're finally admitting the truth about Canelo Alvarez. Well, the truth about Canelo Alvarez, according to a lot of black fighters, even certain black fighters that have said certain things about Canelo in the past, they'll even tell you what they truly think about him, which is that he is the clear number one pound-for-pound fighter. Devin Haney has said that. Gervonta Tank Davis has said that. Once upon a time, Jermall Charlo said that. And now an adversary of Canelo Alvarez in Jermall Charlo, he even claimed that Canelo Alvarez overall is the clear number one pound-for-pound fighter, and Mike Tyson acquiesced. Mike Tyson basically agreed. He didn't change any statement. So does that make Jermall Charlo, does that make Mike Tyson, does that make them sellouts? Does that basically make them on that coon shit, as certain people overall would say? Does that basically make them overall afraid of other people's opinions? Or does that basically mean that that's what they truly believe? So like I said, I've claimed this for a very decently long time. Now, probably within the past couple of years at least, it's very clear that Canelo Alvarez is the number one pound-for-pound fighter. And when you ask overall why they believe Canelo Alvarez is the number one pound-for-pound fighter, they all basically give you the same answer. Because there is no other fighter today that can look so transcendent from going to weight class like Canelo Alvarez can. And people can allege all this bullshit all they want to about, oh, well, that's because Canelo faces the weakest links. If it was because he truly is facing the weakest links, obviously you would not have every single demographic of fighter, or at least certain fighters overall claiming that they believe that Canelo Alvarez is the number one pound-for-pound. Even black fighters who allegedly have this big gripe with Canelo Alvarez because allegedly he's just avoiding every decent competition out there. That's what certain channels like the LDBC and new media will have you believe, when in actuality that is not that is actually not the case. Jermall Charlo and a certain amount of these other black fighters, they actually have a great amount of respect for Canelo Alvarez because they know what he's about. It is what it is. They know that Canelo Alvarez right now is the number one pound for pound. It is what it is. So like I said, they can spread all these bullshit rumors about Canelo. Oh, he needs to face these guys and these guys. Don't get me wrong. I would love to see Canelo face Jermall Charlo just as much as the next. But Rio boxers overall understand Rio. They understand what Canelo Alvarez is doing. That's why Devin Haney, Gervonta Tank Davis, Jermall Charlo, Mike Tyson, a certain amount of these guys, they have claimed that Canelo Alvarez is the number one pound for pound fighter. And the ones overall that have claimed that he isn't the number one pound for pound fighter, more than likely they're fighters that believe that either A, they're already number one pound for pound, or B, more than likely they have a narrative going on. So, like a Floyd Mayweather Jr., who sees a certain amount of people all in all that are claiming that, Canelo is eventually going to be greater than him. I think Floyd Mayweather Jr. sees a rise in that, so I think all in all that he is basically trying to, I'm not going to say trash Canelo, but all in all, he is starting to, say certain derogatory things about him. That's not me saying that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is necessarily insecure per se, but I think he sees all in all, basically the winds of change, which basically means that there's a certain amount of people all in all that are claiming that Canelo is going to become greater than him. Would I ever 100% co-sign that? No, but it is what it is. There is going to be a certain amount of people that truly do believe that. So it is what it is. And we all know already did the deal with Marquez and Oscar De La Hoya, yada, 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 yada. But the people all in all that usually are allowed to go in objective. And that's not me saying overall that you can't have your own opinion. If you believe that Terrence Bud Crawford or Usyk or Fury or someone else or Errol Spence Jr. is the number one pound for pound fighter, that's you. Do you. But for those of us overall that have a pretty decently strict criteria, or a criteria all in all that is usually pretty logical and objective, there's no offense, but you can just tell that Canelo is the number one pound for pound. So not only would I think that I would talk about that, but Mike Tyson also talked about Jermall Charlo. And basically he said, well, who do you plan to face next? I would love to see you face someone big next. Who do you want to face next? And basically the only name that Jermall Charlo seemed somewhat even semi-interested in was Canelo Alvarez. Now, does Jermall Charlo and a certain amount of these other boxers, do they call out Canelo Alvarez because Canelo Alvarez is the easiest challenge there, but he's the most popular guy, like a Ryan Garcia, like a certain amount of these channels, like a Dante's Boxing Nation, or someone else with that narrative would have you believe? Absolutely not. It is what it is. And Dante truly knows that, but he has a narrative to play out because, all in all, basically he's trying to say that Canelo is not the number one pound for pound. He can't have that. All right, he can't have that. So it is what it is. So he's going to do whatever he can to allege that Canelo is not the number one pound for pound fighter. And basically that was one of his arguments to saying that's why Canelo was not the number one pound for pound fighter. Well, even certain black fighters like Jermall Charlo, Mike Tyson, Gervonta Tank Davis, and Devin Haney, they're even saying all in all that Canelo Alvarez is the number one pound for pound fighter. So it just is what it is. Now, also, are you going to get certain black fighters or certain fighters that don't allege that Canelo is the number one pound for pound? Sure. You get an Andre Ward, you get a Terrence Crawford, a Floyd Mayweather Jr., or someone else like that. But there's also a certain amount of black fighters or a certain amount of fighters in general that do believe that Canelo Alvarez is the number one pound for pound fighter. So this narrative, this argument that, Canelo is only ranked number one pound for pound because of white supremacy, quote unquote, and all sort of bullshit, that narrative just don't play out well. It just is what it is because we can clearly tell that there's a certain amount of other real boxers, or boxers all know that, I'm not going to say they all know what they're talking about, but, boxers that truly believe that he's number one pound for pound for a reason. So it is what it is. So don't get on this bullshit with me when it comes down to it and say the only reason why people rank Canelo number one is because, he's just the more popular option. He's got the complexion for the protection. Is that maybe a little bit of a part of that? Maybe a smidge. But at the end of the day, for those of us that say, is Canelo Alvarez the real deal? He is the real deal. So these guys, all in all, that always try to present you with this narrative, it's no offense against these guys. They're full of shit. All right? They're full of shit. It is what it is. But just bringing down the conversation to Mr. Jermall Charlo, when it comes down to it, Mike Tyson asked him a multitude of times who he wanted to face. He also asked him a multitude of times, would you be willing to face David Benavidez? And every single time that David Benavidez was brought up in the conversation, Jermall Charlo got visibly shaken. It just is what it is. Basically meaning what? Basically, all in all, trying to say that that's not a big fight. There's no reason for me to fight him. Now, if you're someone like maybe like a Canelo Alvarez, and you're saying that about a David Benavidez or a Jermall Charlo. Even that to a degree looks bad, but at least Canelo Alvarez faces adversaries that you could argue are pretty much just as tough as those guys, if not even tougher. Someone like a Dimitri Bivol, who in my opinion is a better and tougher opponent and bigger challenge all in all, although maybe not the more popular option than what a David Benavidez or Jermall Charlo would be. The problem is with Jermall Charlo is that this man basically is not willing to face anyone else besides Canelo Alvarez. And the reason why so many of these fighters are willing to face Canelo Alvarez, but they really don't want to face each other, or they may not be willing to face someone else, is because they know that Canelo Alvarez, that not only is he the main payday, but they know that basically if you win or lose to Canelo Alvarez, it's basically like winning or losing against Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao. It's worth it. It's worth it to that degree. It's worth it to that point because basically you're losing overall to the number one guy. There's no winning. There's no losing for you really. Even if you do tend to lose that fight, because it's still the opportunity of a lifetime. So basically, if you don't want to ruin your legacy, after if you lose that fight, when it comes down to it, you can retire right after that, which is more than likely what Billy Joe Saunders is going to do. And maybe some of these other fighters that have lost to Canelo Alvarez. If you're a person all in all that, is looking maybe to get bigger fights later on down the line, even after you just lost, you're going to get a decent amount of coverage because you are a common opponent of Canelo Alvarez. So at the end of the day, like I said, this narrative of, people just want to face Canelo because he's the easiest fight there, bullshit. People want to face Canelo because not only overall is he looked at as the main cash cow, they want to face him because they know overall that their legacy is set either way. So like I said, these channels that try to spread this narrative of, when it comes down to it, they just want to face Canelo because they know he's the easiest option. No, they don't. Trust me, they can say that all they want to, but then when they're in the presence of Canelo Alvarez, they know what's up. All these guys alleging that Canelo all in all is such an easy fight and that he ain't really that special. As soon as Canelo Alvarez comes to the room, Canelo, can I take a picture with you? It's like, get the fuck out of here, man. All these guys know the king when they see one. And Canelo Alvarez right now is the king. It just is what it is. Previously, before him, it was Andre Ward. Previously, before him, it was Floyd Mayweather Jr. Right now, it's solo Canelo Alvarez. It just is what it is. All right? It's just the way things go down at the current moment. So it just is what it is. But I would like to see Jermall Charlo overall eventually in a big fight. I think that it would be very interesting. But it's very clear to me, in my view, that Jermall Charlo, he is not very interested in a fight unless his name is Saul Canelo Alvarez. Every single time that David Benavidez was brought up, he pretty much almost was shaking in his boots and trying to deflect the conversation. So basically what that tells me is that Jermall Charlo never really had any serious interest in facing that of a David Benavidez. I also don't think that he has a serious interest in facing that of a Demetrius Boo Andrade. I don't know if Jermall Charlo 100% truly believes that he can really beat those fighters. But at least with Canelo Alvarez, when it comes down to it, all in all, you basically have nothing to lose because all the pressure would be on Canelo Alvarez. And on top of that, Canelo is looked at not only as the main cash cow, he's looked at overall as the main number one guy. So that is really a fight that is going to be worth it. Those are pretty much the fights that Jermall Charlo is willing to take, which to a degree, some may say there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that Canelo Alvarez does not mainly have you in his sights. He does not overall mainly have you in his focus right now. He has the light heavyweight division. And more than likely after this year, maybe even during this year, he's probably going to try to unify the light heavyweight division in completion. So we'll see all in all what ends up happening there. It'll be overall very, very interesting. But if Jermall Charlo really wants to secure that Canelo Alvarez fight, basically what Mike Tyson alleged that he'd do, he said that, you should embarrass him. That basically, all in all, you should do this, do that. Do I think that that's 100% going to work? No, I don't. Because Demetrius Boo Andrade tried that same thing several years ago. I think that Canelo Alvarez is going to face whoever he wants to face. I think that eventually Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez are going to be on the list anyway, but I don't think that he has him within his sights right now. I think that Canelo Alvarez has a plan, and I think that his plan consists within the next year and a half, especially unifying the light heavyweight division and also getting a 5th weight class title. When it comes down, that more than likely is going to be at the cruiserweight division, of course, against Lunga Makabu, if he can hold on to that title for that long. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much just what I thought that I would talk about in this video, because I thought that it was very particularly interesting. And we're going to see if Jermall Charlo, truly all in all, if he really is interested in that Canelo Alvarez fight, and all in all, if he just doesn't want to wait it out, we'll see if he actually is willing to face Demetrius Boo Andrade and David Benavidez. I can tell you right now that more than likely he's not going to, but we'll see all in all what happens. But it should be very interesting. The Jermall Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez fight I do think it's a very decently big money fight. So I think that eventually Canelo more than likely is going to face him eventually anyway. But the big question is Jermall Charlo going to wait that out, or is he actually going to face someone that maybe would force Canelo Alvarez to take it on a little bit sooner? I think that more than likely the fight is going to happen anyway. So more than likely Charlo, we're not going to see him in the ring with any super duper big challenges before then. But we'll see. I'll know what happens. Anyways, that's really about it for this video. I just thought that I would comment on that somewhat once again. But I just thought that would be very particularly interesting. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.